Welcome to Business Jazz with Paul O'Mahony and Roger Overall. The podcast about how to be genuinely attractive in business today.
Okay, right. Well, I said hello to Frank.
Oh, very good.
You know, I really ought to be ashamed of myself. I cannot remember the names of any of the people who work here at the desk. It's terrible.
So the red-haired girl is Caroline. The girl on the desk.
She's the tall, slim girl.
Yes.
Who's right here. Yeah.
The dark-haired girl who does the audio.
Oh, I have her name written down. Elaine.
The only one I'm not sure about,
Caroline,
is, bear with me.
the girl who's on the desk right now,
Well, I will
and
tell
the
you
other
that.
girl who's just come in, Elaine.
I will tell you. They are.
There definitely are two more.
Oh, that's a shame. That's, there we go.
God, I even find myself wondering, do I find it, without realizing it, easier to remember men's names than women? God.
Well, I'll tell you what, okay, I'm sure, come on baby, this is Squarespace website.
Hey, worry not, Roger. The names are probably on the Republic of Work website.
You know, that's where I am. It's exactly where I am, but and it's, oh, here we go, meet team, there you go. I knew I'd seen them. That's Yvonne.
The lady on the desk.
Yes, that's Yvonne. And then the other one, Amy Ormond, I don't think I've ever met. Lisa, I'm not sure I've met either. Maybe I have met Lisa.
I have definitely met. Amy rings a bell.
Anyway,
But you're saying there's an Amy and there's a Lisa.
Yeah, Yvonne is on the desk at the moment. Right. Yeah, switch that off and put it over there so it doesn't seek for a signal. You'll have to do the same.
Yeah, I've done that.
Great. Your mic up.
Actually, I should put this on airplane mode, which is, since I do not need Wi-Fi in order to record on Voice Record Pro. All right. Well, I'm itching to go on season 8. I can tell you that for nothing.
Welcome to season 8 of Business Jazz then.
Right.
So here we are, Republic of Work. My name is Roger Overall.
And my name is Paul O'Mahony.
And this is Business Jazz, the podcast about being genuinely attractive in business today. And I have the secret, Paul.
Pardon?
I have the secret about being genuinely attractive in business.
Okay,
I know it.
Go.
This is the Holy Grail. I have discovered.
But before you
elixir.
do, can I say we're podcasting from Cork?
You can.
And in particular, we're podcasting from the Republic of Work
Well,
in
even
Cork,
if I wanted to
Ireland,
stop you, I couldn't.
south part of the island, in the EU, Northern Hemisphere. Back
Do you
to
remember
you.
when you were a child and you used to write your address on an envelope and it would have been Limerick, County Limerick, Ireland, Munster, Ireland,
Sorry,
Europe,
I forgot
the
County
world,
Cork. Yes,
the
absolutely.
Milky Way,
The universe.
And
I don't know.
What is beyond the universe? What is the universe expanding into?
Can we go back, please? That's
Yes,
very interesting. I want to hear about the whole. The universe is expanding into the Holy Grail.
Well, I like it. Anyway, here's the Holy Grail for being genuinely attractive in business. I'm going to take you through a story, and we'll get to where we need to be, but just bear with me. So I saw a video during the week. And whether it was somebody posing to be a marketing person for a food company or the food industry, or whether it was an actress, or whether it was somebody genuinely who does marketing on behalf of big food, we'll call it big food, it doesn't really matter, because the impact, what's important was the impact on the audience, and what was important was the secret she revealed. So
you realize you got to be careful about using that word, the secret, because one of the most attractive recent, meaning in the last 10 years, I think, things is called The Secret.
Do not get me started on that vile book. Anyway, moving on. Secret weapons, how she phrased it, actually. So there's three things she says. When we talk about food, there's three things we do. And two of them are around language. So the first one is how they talk about how the food is produced. And of course, we all know phrases like farm fresh. And she gave the example of farm fresh. And we use farm fresh when we want to talk about food, because that feels good, doesn't it? It comes from a farm and it's fresh. And then she brought up a visual of what farm fresh actually means. And it's the most diabolical concentration camp-like situation for animals that you can imagine. But she said, we're allowed to call this farm fresh.
Was it chickens
pens? And pigs. It was dreadful. And she said, we're allowed to call this farm fresh on our packaging. You don't know. What does farm fresh mean? So we use these phrases, we use all these lovely phrases, you know, the food comes from Meadow Vale or something, actually that may even be a brand, I need to be careful now, or it comes from Cuddly Bunny Farms.
Grass-fed cows.
Grass-fed cows is an interesting one, I don't want to get distracted.
You can cut the grass.
You can cut the grass.
And you can allow it to dry out, but it still remains grass.
Is this true? I don't know.
Is that grass-fed? Because everybody else imagines that it's green grass. The cows are roaming freely in the field. Yeah. Sorry, I'm cutting across you, adding no value.
No, but it is an interesting thing, because I think on grass-fed, well, we all know that cows are brought in for the winter, so they're not out in the pastures. We know this. Anyway, it's not like we move them up and down the Alps, but let's not get distracted. So, first thing, how we talk about food is produced. You know, it's lovely language, countryside images, fresh, beautiful, and really the reality is horrific conditions. Secondly, the food industry pumps a load of chemicals into animals, into plants. I mean, meat is just buzzing with hormones. The problem we have at the moment with antibiotics no longer working for us is because there's so much being pumped into animals that nature has become resistant to them. So there's a real problem there. But how does the food industry talk about this problem? How does it get around this problem? Well, again, language. So it uses language to put agriculture and farming at the cutting edge of technology, using science. It uses all these lovely phrases again to make you feel, oh, okay, good, this is all right. You know, that we are poisoning the ground and the water. No, that's not referenced. The language that is used is pushing boundaries, cutting edge. We're moving forward. We're the same kind of people who put people on the moon. That's the level of this is where we're at.
Does that include phrases like superfood?
That's a very good question.
Super, you see, using the word super.
Well, what happens there, I think, is something like a superfood gets hijacked. Something like vegan. Vegan is a very good example. Vegan, plant-based. We all have a sense that maybe vegan is very good. Well, quite frankly, a cup of sulfuric acid is probably vegan, but it's not going to be very good for you if you drink it. So all these things are getting taken and used, but you're right, there's a language around this, and superfood, I mean, you could look at it and say, well, superfood is a natural superfood. Avocados are often rolled out as a superfood.
But enhanced milk with added vitamin X.
And there you are, and then there's another potential interpretation of a superfood. It's like a superhero food, isn't it? So it's all positive. It's positive language around the chemicals that are used, the science. You don't talk about the chemicals and what happens to them. You just talk about the concept of You know, we're the same kind of people who are fighting diseases and what have you. So there's two based on language, and she said those are the two of the three things we do, but they pale into insignificance. And this is where we get to the how to be genuinely attractive in business today. They pale into insignificance with our secret weapon. So of course the audience in the video, you see they're all leaning in now. The secret weapon is about to be revealed. Here comes the secret weapon. And she says, here's the secret weapon. The secret weapon in our marketing of selling this stuff to you is you, the consumer, the audience. Because you know all this, but you don't really care. So here's the secret to being genuinely attractive in business, Paul. Find customers who don't care. Because we all go around the supermarket. We all know what these phrases mean. We all know how food is produced these days. We all know that free range doesn't mean free range. We all know these things. But she said, don't stop people buying the products. It doesn't stop people buying cheap meat that is full of chemicals. It doesn't stop people supporting these industries. So she said, our biggest weapon, our biggest marketing tool, our secret sauce is the fact that you, the consumer, don't care. So there you are. There is the secret to being genuinely attractive in business today, Paul. Find people who don't care.
Hang on, Roger. You are completely abusing language. Now, how to be successful in business today is what you've been talking about. You've been talking about
attractive. How to be attractive.
Okay, how to be attractive in business today. So, how to be attractive in business today. When you're talking about food, you emphasize how food is produced. You emphasize that it's produced in a scientifically advanced way that is very impressive, and you find customers who don't give a damn about the downside of food. We use a word on this podcast called genuinely. And this, for me, is the most important distinguishing feature of this podcast, because there are innumerable marketing podcasts out there. I've even listened to some of them, and they'll tell you how to market your products. And they will give you advice, I'm quite sure, on emphasize that your food is farm fresh, emphasize that you're cutting edge stuff. And your whole effort is to find people who don't care about things that really are genuine concerns for the planet and everything like that. So you're building a business which relies upon people who are indirectly contributing to the end of human civilization, and people who you're tricking people with your language. This is the opposite of being genuinely attractive. Have I misunderstood?
Well, let's look at it from another point of view. Here I am contributing to the downfall of the planet, but I don't want to be reminded of that. I don't want a company to tell me that. I don't want a company to make me feel guilty about buying their products. What's really attractive to me, what is genuinely attractive to me, is a company that takes away that pressure from me, that takes away that feeling of guilt, hides everything. That to me is genuinely attractive. So
No. You're twisting the words. Every single previous episodes in series 1 through series 7, whenever we've used the phrase genuinely attractive, we haven't actually regarded it as the same as really attractive. You see, we have actually, draping human bodies over Porsche cars, human bodies that have certain types of forms, idyllic and very popular forms, is a genuine, using your language, or using the language you're using today, which shocks me, is this is something that's really attractive. It has worked. More Porsches have been sold by people in bikinis than by any other means. I probably, I'm just simply asserting that, but certainly a lot of money is invested in giving that. And we have said we'll have nothing to do with that sort of stuff. Now, we will, I submit, show and tell communications as a company will draw the line at working for people who have got a battery hen operation which describes their eggs as farm fresh. I will not work. Are we reaching a point of difference between you and me? Is this a red letter mark? Are we about to break up live on air?
Well, Paul, I'm not
really strong.
I'm leaving this podcast now.
This is disgraceful. And you describe this person as,
of course I'm not.
well, I am, unless you clarify your position to my satisfaction.
Well, I mean, what I'm doing is creating a genuinely attractive podcast that's engaging and entertaining, because I have put out an extreme view that we both know that I don't back and I don't support.
We might both know. Convince the listeners that you, having led them up the garden path. I mean, this is like, I don't know, I'll describe it as not as the yellow brick road, but as the dirty, muddy brick road.
Foul
into fair is foul and foul is fair. Anyway, look, to cut back to the point, did you actually say, deliberately or inadvertently, that you saw a video from which you can learn a lot and which you can usefully imitate? Is that what you said at the beginning?
What I said was...
What did you say?
What I said in a tongue-in-cheek way was that I had discovered the secret of being genuinely attractive in business today. What I have discovered, of course, is a nest of deceit and lies, and the polar opposite of how you and I would suggest somebody should market their business.
And what would you have done if I wasn't here? I mean, I agree that you're tongue-in-cheek. I know you well enough to know that you are genuinely different from what you were describing. But let me just say to you, you say at the beginning of the podcast, this is, I found out the elixir of life, or the, whatever you said it was, the golden grail. Somebody listens to the podcast and is suddenly distracted just as you reach the point where you say, find customers who don't care, and they get some distraction, they don't listen anymore, and they're going to a marketing meeting where they have to determine marketing strategy, and one of them says to themselves, I've just heard one of the greatest marketing brains to be found in the Republic of Work today.
I'm not even the greatest marketing brain on this sofa. But look,
you are, but anyway, that's another misleading remark, since you're the only person sitting on that sofa. Sorry, I'm in this. I'll let nobody get away with anything today. But anyway, the key thing is that they've stopped listening.
Yes. Untold damage has been done, Paul, because somebody may have actually stopped the podcast thinking to themselves, I've heard all I need. I've got the one big takeaway from today. And I'm going into this marketing. This is true. What would I have done on my own? I have no idea. What would I have done if you hadn't been here?
The marketing executive of the pharmaceutical company has gone into the meeting and said, we must describe the ingredients in our product as being drawn from the forests, the rainforests. So we have all our ingredients are rainforest. The fact that they've been modified by cutting edge science is neither. Our ingredients are cutting edge, the most advanced tested ones ever, and they've been given huge tests.
Well,
finally, we're selling them stuff that will make them addicted.
Here's my answer to that. Everything I've just said and everything you've said in rebuttal is not really, I think, going to influence a pharmaceutical. It's not going to influence a supermarket. It's not going to influence the way large food companies produce their food. I don't think somebody's going to listen to this podcast who works for a company that produces hundreds of thousands of eggs in a battery operated situation.
Some of our listeners know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who is about to decide whether they're going to go to genuinely free range, giving each of the chickens at least 10 square yards to roam. And, do not underestimate the incalculable influence of Business Jazz Podcast.
Well, if we have incalculable influence, I'd like to go to the other side of the equation, the consumer side, the buyer side, the customer side, and that is when you are looking at the marketing message from a company, you have an obligation as well. You are part and parcel of this messaging process. And your role in this is to decide whether that marketing message is genuine. I don't think you can just accept that any company is being genuinely attractive in its marketing, is being genuine in what it says. I think you have a role to verify as well. And then if you find out that they are genuine, well, that's good. But you can't as a consumer, because if you don't verify, then you are proving the point that actually you don't care, in my opinion.
You raise a really interesting, I'd almost describe it as philosophical point, and there is a philosophical element, but there's also a question of culpability, and there's a question of power. So there are three elements in what you've just said. Philosophically, what you've actually said is that the listener in any communication makes meaningful what they're hearing. So I look at something that tells me this car is the greatest thing since sliced bread. That means nothing unless I internalize it and say that's the fastest car going. So the listener in that sense makes meaningful the stimuli that are put out there. So in that sense, and that is a philosophical point because it relates to all human communications. The listeners to this podcast are making meaningful whatever we are saying, and in that sense, I get to another of my points in relation to it, to say the listener is thereby culpable for all the damage that's done by the advertising industry, because the listener makes the advertising meaningful, and it colludes with the advertising company and is thereby has shared. And the third point I want to make is about power. There is a total imbalance in power between the media company pumping out the advertising and the poor old individual consumer who is basically doesn't have an ability to question the advertiser. You might see a program on TV that tells you that you shouldn't eat sulfuric acid unless you are a vegan. But you can't interrogate that person in order to clarify what they meant and what sense you should make of that preposterous interpretation.
You could say, well, yes, there's an imbalance in that regard, but there's another massive power imbalance, and the power shifts to the consumer, because the consumer can decide to take action, to be engaged, to not be passive and accept the message that free range means what they think it means, or what they want it to mean, which is basically private rooms for chickens and acres of free roaming space during the daytime. They can decide, well, what does this mean? Is this really the case? And the advertiser can promise everything they want, but they cannot stop an individual from actively questioning and actively researching. And if you run up in that research, if you run up against a wall of secrecy, or run up against a barrier of no information or nothing forthcoming, or very flimsy information, you're getting signals. You're getting certain signals about, hang on, is this story then really true? Why won't they show me a photograph of these lovely fields? Why? So I think the power, you can see the power in two ways. Yes, if the consumer is passive, then the advertiser has a lot of power. Believe my story. If the consumer is active, then actually the advertiser has a bit more of a problem. And then here comes business jazz hoving into view. For God's sakes, be genuine and honest in your communication, because then you've nothing to hide. You don't have to be duplicitous. You don't have to do double work. You don't have to create it's very difficult to create a facade. It's much easier just to tell the truth, I think.
Well, that's a subject for another conversation, but I just want to ask you a specific question. When's the last time you went into a supermarket and did a weekly shop?
Me personally?
Yes.
A long time ago.
Okay. But you have a good enough memory to remember. You do actually, you can imagine somebody going into a supermarket, right? Now, can you imagine an active consumer going into the supermarket to do their weekly shop?
Mm-hmm.
How many hours would it take them to complete the weekly shop if they were to actively question every piece of information that was on the product? And thereby hangs the difficulty and the power imbalance. I mean, I can go into a supermarket and wanting to buy Irish honey, and I can see the label on the honey, which makes it look like it's coming from Ireland. And but what will influence me to read the small print where it says a product of EU and other countries? So they're not Irish bees, and the bees could be Vietnamese bees and Austrian bees.
But herein lies the power, coming back to the original point. So there is something in this point, not that we're advocating this, but there is something in this point. You, as the consumer, don't care enough to make it a priority to set aside the time to do this.
Well, I do, but I mean, I can't check out the honey and check out the raisins and check out the bottle of wine and do all of these things at the same time. So I think that it's unfair and unrealistic to say that there's a kind of even balance, that on the one hand, the powerful advertiser can say things, and on the other hand, an active consumer can interrogate and do that thing. So therefore, there's a kind of equality. Okay, fair enough, but I doubt you'll persuade many people. And my last point in relation to this is that this is not a podcast for everybody in business. We are not in the business of making this podcast even available to certain kinds of people. I hope that this podcast is only being listened to by people who are genuinely interested in being genuine. Now, there are other ways of selling eggs than calling them farm fresh and putting the chickens in pens, which you don't let anybody photograph. You will be a small niche seller of eggs if you allow your hens to genuinely free roam. So we're really in this business for probably niche businesses who are the good guys, as opposed to the bad guys who are tricking us. And you know what? We don't have time today to list all the trickery, including, made in Ireland as a label on products, Roger. And what you have to have on a product in order to make it Irish.
Well, let's just say one thing. This podcast, can we agree that this podcast is made in Ireland? Let's just see now. It's recorded in Ireland. It's produced in Ireland. Now, it's not necessarily broadcast from Ireland.
Well, first of all, you've given a misleading statement by saying it's from Ireland. It isn't from Ireland. Ireland is a place that is a big island with lots of different places. It only comes from Cork. So this
we
is
have to say it only comes
podcasting from
these two
Cork.
sofas. These two sofas
So-
from the Republic. of
So
Work
in
where
a
it comes
sense,
from.
people write things like coming from the EU.
Yeah.
And
So, welcome to the podcast that is coming from one sofa. And if you could get the GPS coordinates of where I'm sitting, the GPS coordinates of where Paul is sitting, to the centimetre, that's where the podcast is from.
And not only are you coming from the soft seat cushion, but you're not even coming from the whole soft seat cushion because you're not wide enough to occupy it. So all I'm saying is that you're about 2/5 along one side of the sofa.
Forget the sofa, Paul. Where is all this coming from? Well, you could say it's coming from our mouths, which are separated from the sofa. But then, even then, the signals to our mouths are coming from our brains. Welcome to Business Jazz, a podcast that originates in the brains of Paul O'Mahony and Roger Overall. Thank you very much for listening.
I'm speechless. Right. Season 8 has started
Well, that was a nice, lively
with
discussion.
a bang.
See, I think...
Oh.
See, that's good. We just start off with a ludicrous proposition and tear it down. Right. I thought that was very good. I thought that was
Well, I enjoyed it. I think
very
it
enjoyable.
was actually, it was good because in a kind of way, we did a few things, including we reintroduced the podcast.
We did.
And there could well be people who plug into this podcast for the first time.
Yeah.
And they're kind of wondering, what's this podcast about?
Yes.
And if they listen to that whole episode, they probably would have a better idea than if they simply read stuff on the blog or on the somewhere else.
Well, what I particularly liked about it was the you and I share a particular mindset. Therefore, the podcast can often, because there's no tension or friction then. So by one of us taking up a opposite position, even if it's not, I wouldn't defend it to the hilt or anything, or it can be picked to pieces or what have you, it creates a dynamic which is very useful. Now, what did I do with? Did I leave it over there?
Well, I'm just thinking, do we send this episode to River View Eggs in Glanmire? What are they called? River?
I don't know.
Anyway, they're our local egg producer.
Yes.
Do we send it to them?
And see what,
Do we send it to Porsche? Because they got a mention. No, I don't think we do send it to Porsche. But I think it might go to the local egg producer in Glanmire. Anyway, there we are. I'm going back to get another cup of coffee.